Thanks for coming tonight in this cold weather and venturing out at night in the winter. Um, I Tonight when I talk about Burchfield, I always start my talks about Burchfield um, because I think I come from a different perspective than a lot of people. To me, Mr. Burchfield was our neighbor and our friend. And yeah, he also happened to be a famous artist. But my memories of him, particularly when I was when I was a young child, I mean, I remember seeing him we lived next door to him. So when I was growing up, I guess that's important to say, isn't it? um, when I was growing up, we lived next door to him, and then we became very good friends. After Mr. Burchfield died, my mother bought that house, and we moved into the Burchfield house. So from the time I was around 11 or 12, uh, through many, many years later, I lived in the Burchfield house. So I remember, vividly when I was little and we would play in the yard, and my mother would always say, she would often say, listen, Mr. Burchfield is out in the yard painting, don't be loud and don't bother him. And, inevitably we would kick the ball and we'd go over the fence into the yard right where he was standing and painting. But he always threw the ball back, so it was okay. But he was a nice guy. He was a member of the neighborhood. He cared about the community. We were friends. He was approachable. And I remember they used to go on vacation, and my mother and either myself or one of my sisters, we would take care of the plants that were in the studio. And then also in the studio, he would leave containers of water because there wasn't any humidity in the studio. It had a big gas furnace and it would get dry. So he would leave big bowls of water around so that he could get some more humidity into the space, so his paints and other papers wouldn't get too dry. So tonight I'm going to talk about Burchfield as my neighbor and our friend, and also his relationship with East Aurora. This is him standing in front of the studio in Gardenville. And the studio was funny because when we bought the house and moved over there, that studio became me and my siblings' playhouse. But the internal pieces of the studio, my mother donated to the Burchfield Penny Art Center. So when you go to the center today, the recreation of that studio is his studio. They came over, I remember them coming over to the house and taking out the shelves and the paper and all the things that were there and then rebuilding it over at the Burchfield Penny. So for me, it's always really fun to go there because I remember like playing around all those shelves and things. And he also in the studio, there were two, when you walked into the studio, there was a skylight, and there was a shelf under the skylight that had two stuffed birds, a crow and an owl. And they were the most frightening birds. Like even my mother was scared of them. And it was like when you walked in, it was like those birds were looking at you. Those were the first things she donated because. Again, talking about him as a neighbor, I recently had an exhibit of collages that are my work, and it was based on ephemera from the house and things that Burchfields had sent us. Again, they sent us. We have Christmas cards to the Albarella family. When they went out west once, I remember Mr. Burchfield sent us a postcard with a donkey on it and told us about this donkey that he had seen in Arizona. So I'm going to read a little bit that goes with this collage, which are all things from the Burchfields, most of them. When my brother and I were born, it was quite a big thing. In those days, twins were not common at all. We were wrapped in local celebrity. Local shops gave us gifts, neighbors oohed and ahed, and everyone marveled at how my mother would now have 6 children for whom to care. The Burchfields did what they had done each time my mother gave birth. They sent their best wishes in a card and handed flowers over the fence picked from their beautiful gardens. I love the fact that they crossed out baby on the card and wrote babies. Obviously, Hallmark didn't know about twins yet. The well-loved toys were found discarded in a box, along with a few books, which were added to our collection when we moved into the house. Today, they don't give new babies bracelets with their names on it anymore, and maybe that's okay because our name was spelled wrong. The card and good wishes from the Burchfields are so typical of what good neighbors did in those days and still do today. So when I talk about Burchfield and his relationship and connection to East Aurora, he was never part of the Roycroft movement, but East Aurora was important to him. First of all, it's pretty close to Gardenville. We just shoot down Seneca Street and we're here. And also because there were so many beautiful places where he could paint. It served as a significant source for his artwork and for particularly the depictions of the natural world and the changing seasons. He attended church here, Emmanuel Lutheran Church, and others, and he's also buried in Oakwood Cemetery here in East Aurora. The other thing that I think is really important to know about Burchfield is that he kept incredible detailed journals. And his journals recorded everything, recorded sounds, the birds chirping, the insects. It recorded colors, the colors of things so that he could recreate those colors in his work. What was the wind like? What was the sun like? All of these things informed his artwork. And those journals, you can read the journals. They're at the Burchfield Penny Art Center, but they are such beautiful works of writing. And someone once said, he probably could have become as famous as a naturalist as he did as an artist, but he chose to do art. But his journals are really wonderful. He often painted not just what he saw, but what he remembered or what he felt. Journals of a hawk flying, the moon rising, the contentment of a simple lunch. These impressions infuse his paintings in more than just representation. And his paintings are a result of direct observation, journaled memory, and inner vision. So I'm going to show you some of his paintings tonight and read some of his journal entries. This painting, Road in Sunlight and Shadow, portrays a country road southeast of East Aurora. This piece captures the changing seasons and the natural beauty of the landscape. It's an example of his mid-career realistic works, and it illustrates an American vista and at the same time focuses on the beautiful patterns of light and tree shadows as the subject suggests. This next reading was written by Nancy Weekly, who is the Burchfield scholar. Road in Sunlight and Shadow is an example of the romantic realism that Burchfield embraced in the 1930s. However, there are reasons to believe it is not just a pretty picture of a lovely day in summer. The lilting light, rich shadows, stately trees, and evidence of human coexistence with nature represent a condensation of all that was meaningful to the artist. During the summer of 1936, after decades of vacillation, he still had conflicted feelings about believing in Christian orthodoxy. In his journal entries, he used the road as a metaphor for his search for the divinity that he and his wife and most American society accepted. After taking his daughter Mary Alice and her friend Marie to nearby Elma for catechism instruction, as he did not impede his wife's wishes to raise their children within religious parameters, he traveled down the Jameson Road, the country road in this painting, where he stopped at a little grove and gave more thought to his ongoing debate about believing in nature versus God. 2 days later, he made a simple observation that the beauty of nature is all important and the color of the woods is what he tried to paint faithfully. As the month drew to a close, he regretted thinking that nature did not hold all meaning for him, and he rejected the accounts of biblical dogma. On July 26th, after seeing an inspirational evening sky, he found the awe-inspiring power of nature to represent the symbolic order for his sense of being and all that exists. 8 more years would pass before he decided to join his wife's Lutheran church. November Storm. And we have a person with us tonight who had November Storm in his home for many, many years, right? You were watching, so I'm sorry I forgot your name, but I'm gonna.
It was the Herrick house, and I was integrated into that family because I was with them for over 60 years. So I grew up with that.
So he grew up with November Storm. Painted in 1950, November Storm portrays the turbulent change of seasons from autumn to the approach of winter. Burchfield found inspiration on a little-used road southeast of East Aurora for November Storm, depicting the transition from autumn to winter during a blizzard. A few colorful leaves remain on the ground, but young trees are bent by the strong, icy wind. A sturdy old tree rebuffs the gale that whips a massive white cloud into a winged spirit in the distant blackening sky. This next piece is from his journal. A full-scale blizzard was in progress. I protected myself and my easel by setting my beach umbrella under a hemlock tree pointing into the wind. There's no snow shown in the painting. I tried to give the illusion of a snowstorm by the treatment of the objects in the painting. This is Song of the Cicada, and there's actually like 3 or 4 paintings all labeled the same thing. He redid them as years went on. Charles Burchfield's paintings often used stylized eyes and other recurring motifs he called conventions for abstract thoughts to express emotions and the mystical animated qualities he perceived in nature. These elements were part of his unique symbolic language to, quote, paint not what he sees in nature, but what is there on a spiritual level. Burchfield developed an extensive personal shorthand of abstract symbols to represent various sensory experiences and emotions in landscapes. And as you look at his work, you're going to see these repeating patterns of these symbols, which were part of his language. He devised a shorthand to record sounds he heard in nature, and these symbols became abstract images and pictorial symbols he later used in his song painting. Burchfield's song painting refers to his work where he visually represents the sounds of nature, particularly bird songs and insect noises. His paintings, like Song of the Cicada, use abstract and symbolic visual elements to convey a sense of sound, movement, feeling, transitory audio experiences, and turn them into visual art. He even developed his own musical symbols to depict sounds like the rustling of telegraph wires. And again, when you look at his paintings, you get the feeling of the wind moving through. You get the feeling of hearing the sound coming off the trees and the trees rustling. This painting conveys a feeling of summer days' oppressive heat. The hazy sky appears to melt down into the landscape. The tops of the flowers are radiant with orange aura. 2 rhythms appear in the painting. The first is expressed in the fields of grain. Wavy lines of rising heat appear in the foreground and extend into the background as heat waves swell across an endless field. Up in the trees, we see the rhythm of the cicada song. In the month or so that cicadas live as an adult, they're found high in the trees. Their song is a shrill pulse that extends for several minutes before winding down. In this painting, tick marks on the treetops, and most significantly, zigzag strokes in the tallest tree, appear to lift the top of the tree as if it were propelled up by an explosion of sound. The cicada's song ends with cooler temperatures. Weather folklore states that the first frost will occur 6 weeks after the cicada's first song. And as I said earlier, there are several paintings entitled Song of the Cicada. And, excuse me, in his later life, especially from the 1940s onward, he frequently re-engaged ideas and studies from his youth. He sometimes enlarged earlier small works by adding strips of paper. And when you look at his work in the Burchfield penny, you can clearly see like where he painted something and then he decided to make it bigger and he added strips either on either side or on the top and bottom. And he did that quite frequently. He also revisited specific natural experiences and feelings, and he would make them larger compositions. This is Song of the Telegraph. Most of the day on Song of the Telegraphs, first east on Clinton Street to get studies of telegraph poles with knotholes in them. A dark, cloudy day with strong wind of north and occasional light snow flurries. Then back to the studio. Most of the day went into the designing of the picture. Although I had laid out the design motifs from a preconceived idea, as usual, I found the actual carrying out necessitated the complete rethinking or abandoning of such motifs and adopting new ones. A new motif that gave me great pleasure and which just seemed to grow of its own accord was a vast cloud in the form of a cawing crow, soaring above the woods to the left and heading due north. It symbolized for me the old yearning of boyhood for the Northlands. Be the telegraph line itself. It is easy to invent a multitude of symbols to represent the humming of a telegraph pole. But just because it's easy, therein lies the danger of overdoing it. Another series of motifs that gave me pleasure were the white wind motifs, introduced in the sky and above the woods and running like white fire across the dead, bleached out grass in the foreground, licking at the ancient gray rail fence running parallel to the road. Evening, the birthday dinner, delicious. Breaded veal, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, beets, cucumber salad, carrot salad, strawberry pie. Mart and Hank, Marta, his daughter, and her husband Hank, gave me an Indian bracelet for my studio bench and a card Martha had made, a delightful little spring rain scene. Art, his son, gave me a gray tie with a peacock design. So typical that a son would give him a tie, right? In addition to the records, a box of salted nuts. In the evening, Bertha and I played the records, both remarkable music, and Sally called to wish me birthday greetings. This is July sunlight pouring down. Burchfield's style evolved from early abstract-inspired and energetic nature scenes to later transcendental and symbolic works. He innovated by adapting oil painting techniques to watercolor, building up layers and painting on board to create more textured and dimensional works, and continually returned to and expanded upon his childhood themes of nature's energy and local landscapes. His work progressively became more mystical, using invented symbols to convey spiritual and emotional experiences rather than purely realistic depictions. Again, this is from his journal. Painted on the Genesee Road southeast of East Aurora. The aim was to give the feeling of brilliant sunlight pouring down from the zenith. This is not the searing sunlight of a drought season. Rather, it is a life-giving flood of warmth and light, which the earth and all things growing on it drink in with gratitude, a benediction from the creator of all life. White birches. 1948 is significant because it bridges Burchfield's lived experience, his journal, his experimental use of vertical composition, and his lifelong pursuit of expressing nature's spiritual and emotional power. It's not just a record of the day. It's a transformation of that day into an emblem of how he saw the natural world, Burchfield's journals weren't just notes. They were part of his creative process. White Birches reflects his practice of transferring written observation into visual composition. It shows how his words and sketches became springboards for his finished watercolors. Again, from his journal. Morning. Bertha to Martha's apartment for the day to help her. To the country southeast of East Aurora was his famous road, southeast to East Aurora, painting. The best way to get there, 20A, right on 98 to Johnsonburg, 1.3 miles, east on road, then second road to right. A calm, lean, almost cloudless day as one gets away from the lake, more and more even, almost full October color. Park under a rich orange maple tree, one of two such. First, eat lunch at base of tree. Then a sketch of the smaller maple tree using a very tall upright paper, 44 by 19. When I did the one the other day of a long horizontal 19 by 40, Bertha asked me why I didn't try the same thing vertical. All afternoon, the father and his boy on horseback. The walker, with pack on his back, who strode unsmiling down the middle of the road, would look neither to the right nor the left. For walk afterwards, westward through fields, a bouquet of pink milkwort and goldenrod, a field of grass with large fuzzy seed heads, bleached almost white and lit up by the declining sun. Northward, and down into a deep ravine, whose course I followed upward, climbing over fallen logs from side to side. Occasional glimpses of sunlit treetops, pale yellow jewelweed. Come out right by the car. Bouquet of asters and goldenrod, then for a walk down the road to south. A calm, beautiful hour. The moon about 3/4 full, high in the southeast. Warm golden sunlight streaming across the land. An enormous hawk flying low over a buckwheat field. Brought the car to a more open spot and ate lunch with great contentment. Then homeward, right on First Road, which led to Johnsonburg and Route 98. Bertha was enthusiastic about the sketch. A little after 9 to the station to meet Mary Ellis. She seemed tired, but stimulated by her experience at Sally and Red's. Sally was his other daughter. He and Bertha were madly in love with each other forever. And Bertha not only was his wife, but she commented on his work, and he looked to her for comments on his work, and she was also his protectorate. Nobody got past Bertha in that yard. And people tried as he got more and more famous. People would try and come and visit him, or would try and go into his studio or whatever, and you had to get by Bertha. Bertha had been raised on a farm, and she was the one that shoveled the snow. She was the one that took the garbage cans out. She was the one that did that because she didn't want Charlie to hurt his hands. So she really took on that role, and she really was his protectorate. And it used to be funny watching people try to give her a story and get past her to see him. But she knew who should see him and who shouldn't, and she was the gatekeeper. They were a great love story. They were devoted to each other. And for my mother and our family, Bertha and Charles were a lot older than my mother and father. But it didn't matter because they were still neighbors. And my mother and Mrs. Burchfield got to be very good friends. I remember after Mr. Burchfield died, Bertha lived in the home for a while by herself. But she was also old at that time and aging even more. But every night she would come over. We had a small little porch, and Bertha would come over and sit with my mother, and they would have tea and pie because both of them had crazy sweet tooths. So they would have pie just about every night, And then my mother would make my younger brother walk Bertha back across the driveway, make sure she got to the house okay. We remember, my brothers and I remember Bertha because at Halloween, she would give out apples, except to us. And to us, we got like a couple of pennies and nickels and a quarter, just the three Albarella kids. So we always knew we were special, and we loved those pennies and quarters. So this is, again, one of my collages. The doodle is a doodle, one of Burchfield's sketches. You know, he was a crazy sketch. He sketched everywhere. He sketched on the back of the heating bill. He sketched on any piece of paper that was anywhere around, he would sketch. And I remember when we first moved into the house, it went to the studio, like it was just plasterboard walls. And there were sketches on the walls where the phone was, because obviously he'd been standing there talking on the phone and he'd just be sketching while he was talking. But there are many of these doodles floating around, I think, still today. Some were done with colored pencils, some are in black and white. Some were actually sketches that were sketches for specific works. And you can look at that sketch and see kind of the idea forming for that, where if you hold it up with the work, you can see it. And in some cases, he marked the sketches, that it was a sketch for sunlight and shadow or a sketch for something else. The other note that says BKB, Bertha K. Burchfield, again, to show their relationship, it is a lovely letter from Charles to Bertha, and it starts out, "My dearest Bertha," and goes on. It's a very sweet note that was there, and another doodle in the corner. So there are several things that I have that were left in the house, or were things that were sent to us, you know, Christmas cards that were sent to the Albarellas, or little notes. And then there are other things that were just left in the studio or at the house that I've saved, along with bunches of other stuff, because I'm kind of a pack rat, so I save all that stuff. December Storm. Burchfield was also very much into music, big music, Beethoven, Mahler, Sibelius. And he had a record player on the second floor of his house. And in the summer, when the windows were open, we could hear this big orchestra music coming out of his windows throughout the day. Again, Nancy Weekly described the effect of music on Burchfield. Burchfield's journals reveal very little direct influence of other artists' works on his painting, but the monumental significance of natural sounds and music is clearly evident. Many works may be attributed directly to specific musical compositions. Most importantly for Burchfield, music conjured up visions and memories. Music was inseparable from his aesthetic. His record collection indicates a range of musical tastes from medieval motets to 20th century symphonies. Among his favorite composers were Bach, Mozart, Vivaldi, Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Wagner, whom he later rejected, Dvorak, and Sibelius. The artist strove to achieve in his own painting the same heroic romanticism that he heard in music, particularly that of Beethoven and Sibelius. From his journal regarding December Storm, December Storm depicts sunlight bursting through storm clouds hovering over houses visible from the backyard in Gardenville. This also represents a memory of a savage winter storm that he remembered from childhood and recalled it during an equally ferocious storm in 1941. During the depressing events of World War II, Burchfield found reassurance in the music of Sibelius and Beethoven, that the world would return to peace and faith in God. He discounted the pessimistic work of other artists, recommending that each artist should strive to emulate the power and significance of such works as Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and the Sibelius Fifth Symphony, which is known as an act of faith, which was contemporaneous with World War I. Burchfield associated December storm with Pearl Harbor, although he had started it the day before because he had a feeling of a violent storm that was about to break upon us. The painting can be read as an allegory of war, the power of nature, the redemptive glory of God, and a visual equivalent to musical masterworks. Spiritually rich, December storm symbolizes hope in the face of World War. Hush Before the Storm. Charles Burchfield began working on his third and final style in April of 1943, perhaps in response to his 50th birthday or to the urgency of World War II, as he revived the theme and mood that captivated him in his youth, the intense emotion that he saw, felt, and heard in the natural world. This shift away from the solid, tangible forms of his more straightforwardly representational middle style, used to render urban American industry and architecture, in favor of impassioned evocations of the landscape, allowed Burchfield to explore his highly personal view of the universe. From his journal, to the country southeast of East Aurora, sketching. I tried in vain to find a subject on the spot. I had in mind doing something dark and mysterious, like a solemn Bach fugue, something to do with the dark interior of a tree on a cloudy day. But the country proved uninteresting, so north again, and almost at once I saw a promising maple. Parked under some roadside maples, and found on second look the tall maple with an elm behind it to be very good. All afternoon on the sketch, exaggerating the darkness of the sky and tree. Also in his journals, he has a letter that he wrote to Elizabeth Navis about Hush Before the Storm. And the letter says, Hush Before the Storm represents a mid-afternoon in early July, a summer thunderstorm whose deep rumblings have been heard in the distance for some time is about to break. As yet, there is no wind or other disturbances. Instead, an ominous quiet prevails. Trees and plants, which still have the lushness usually associated with June, stand trembling, as if in fear of the violence to come. Deep mystery lurks in the black interior of the trees, and the feeling of foreboding is emphasized by the startled white daisies in the foreground. Those daisies do look pretty startled. He loved nature so much, and he painted often in his backyard. His studio was right next to our backyard, and in our backyard we had a big quarter of an acre, half an acre of garden. And I remember one year, my father would just let the garden go in the winter. He didn't till it till spring. And there were a bunch of dead flowers and weeds and some corn stalks and stuff that were left back there. And it was spring, and he was about to turn it under. And I remember Mr. Burchfield asking him if he could wait another week to turn it under because he was finishing a painting of the things that were in the garden. And of course, my father said, "Yeah, no problem." Why he wants to paint weeds, I don't. Yeah. But the other thing that was interesting when I was growing up, my mother, as I told you, she always said, "Don't bother Mr. Burchfield," and she always said, "He's a famous painter. He's a famous painter," which kind of it was hard for me as a little kid to wrap my head around. But one day, it was second or third grade. In school, we had an art class, and they brought in this great big book of famous paintings. And I was looking through the book of famous paintings, and in that book, there was a painting by Charles Burchfield. And I had seen it at his house at one point. And right then, I went home to my mother and I said, "You were right, he is famous. His painting is in a book." It was wonderful. He used to, he knew my mother who had 6 small children. did not get to art galleries much, and we did not get to art galleries when I was young very much at all. I don't remember going to an art gallery when I was a child, actually. But Mr. Burchfield, like all artists, he would take all the paintings that were going to go to a particular show, and he would lay them out in his living room on the sofa and on the floor and on a chair, so he could. And he always invited my mother over to come and look at it, and he was always proud to show her what was going to be going to the gallery. And so it was kind of cool that you always got like a preview of every art show. And then when my oldest sister got married, for her wedding, he gave her a painting. And then he also gave my mother a painting as the mother of the bride. And those, that painting hung in our house. I saw it all the time in our living room. And I remember there was a time they were doing a retrospective of his work at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And I happened to be living in New York at the time. And so I, of course, went over to the museum to see this painting that my mother had loaned it to them for the show. And I remember going into the museum and standing there and seeing that painting amidst all these other paintings in that huge museum. And I remember just saying to the lady that was standing next to me, "That is my painting. It hangs in our house for the rest of the year." She wasn't that impressed. It was New York, right? Cloverfield in June. From his diary, from his journal. Up rather late. It's very warm and quiet and humid again. Rather numb from my experience yesterday painting a clover field, but I wish I could prolong and expand such moments. How I long to break the confinement of my adulthood and get back to the innocent wonder of childhood. To come up the Painter Road, barefoot, hot, tired, hungry, and thirsty, and to feel the almost terrifying power of the summer solstice noon beating down on the white, dusty road. Hank, Martha's husband, who is continuing his flying lessons at the Gardenville airport down the street, said last night that he would fly over our yard this morning. We had forgotten it until we heard the plane flying low and we ran out and waved to him. Burchfield expressed agony over his painting Cloverfield in June, feeling he had missed the enchanting season due to his drawing project and wishing he could recapture the innocent wonder of his childhood. Other June entries mention the glaring with a soft, luminous silver sheen of dead grass under an ice storm, the persistent humming of insects in a meadow, and the smell of clover from the warm fields, and a walk with an innocent eye that captured the cold wind carrying the odor of clover. Summer Solstice, this is one of his most famous, I like this the best. Summer Solstice, in the memory of the American chestnut tree. Again from his journal, summer solstice is the radiant first day of summer in the Northern Hemisphere. It will be the longest day of the year and the shortest night. Burchfield wanted to celebrate this great moment when the sun and earth meet in their greatest intimacy, a truly mystical event. This idea of summer solstice has haunted me ever since I set down the idea in the early 20s. In fact, it goes back even further to 1915, when I first began to see nature with the eye of an interpreter. Some of the notes of June that year already express an abstract conventionalization of the idea of noon on the longest day of the year. He often painted, and then those shelves that you saw in the studio, there would be paintings in all those shelves. They were dated, they were labeled really clearly, and then years later he would go back and add to that painting or change it or expand it. But he was constantly reworking his work. Like, his work never seemed to be done. He writes in his journals later at one point about being done and having to leave it alone. You have to know when to leave it alone. So this is, again, showing just how things can go wrong. To the country southeast of East Aurora with a view to painting. I was seeking a little brown water stream where I painted a bed of wild iris in 1943. I remembered it as a delightful spot, and two, I wanted to get some ideas for enlarging the 1943 sketch. The day was almost a complete failure. In the first place, my memory was at fault on the location of the place. I thought it was on the Blakely Corners Road, but I was wrong. But the real trouble of the day was a succession of flat tires, 3 in all in the same corner of the car. The first occurred when I was retracing my road from Route 16. Back in East Aurora, I spent an hour waiting for the flat to be fixed. The second dirt road also proved to be wrong, and so I went back to the Blakely Corners Road and followed it east of Route 78, where it turns into a narrow dirt lane. My little Vale was not on this road, and I spent an hour or so looking for some other likely spot to spend the day. Nothing seemed right. I found a rather attractive spot in a little valley where I decided to eat my lunch. This proves a very pleasant hour. The day was bright and sunny, and all nature seemed in the full blush of first growth, a cool wind from the east. When I went to resume my drive, I discovered the second flat. By noon, I felt perhaps something was wrong with the axle or wheel, and I thought I should head for a more traveled road. I pursued a devious route over several different dirt routes to Route 16. After I had gone north on it for some distance, I decided to look at the replacement tire and see if all was well. Air was coming out of it with a loud hissing noise. Fortunately, I was near a service station and I pulled over. We discovered one of the tires was ruined beyond repair and the other required a blowout patch. When all this was completed and I went to drive away, the right front wheel locked and refused to budge, even when the garage attendant raised the car and tried to turn it by hands. When he confessed to his ignorance of brakes, I called the East Aurora AAA garage and got them to give him directions over the phone. Eventually, the wheel was released and I went on my way, now towards home. With so little braking power, I had to play safe and creep along. A misspent day that seems like a nightmare. The dark ravine. So the ravine on Cole Road, just above the roads with the Boston Valley Road. Painting all day on a ravine with a deep hemlock at its head. It is cloudy, and so their heads look long, yellow and violets. Evening to Lenten service. Forgot to take organ contracts Holder Miller had arranged for the organ builder to come to the church and explain the contract to the people, but he forgot the contracts. We waited a while, but he did not come, so I was saved. Letter from Gino that Frank is better. Reading in Wind in the Willows, thoughts of the last twilight in woods, a hepatica or spring beauty in front of the black yawning cavern of a hollow tree. The last nostalgic gleam of the fading daylight behind a wooded hill, at whose base is a little village in deep gloom. Thoughts of boys setting out from a town or village in bright sunlight on a Saturday in March, gone. And there he is. There's not a lot of pictures of him smiling. He wasn't like a super smiley guy. He was very quiet, and although he spoke with people, he didn't like to be the center of attention. He didn't like to be in crowds. That is he and Bertha. They were happier than what they looked. Here's one of his Christmas cards. Every year he would paint a Christmas card and he would send them to friends and family. And some of them were actually, during his lifetime, 14 of his paintings were reproduced as Christmas cards by companies like the American Artists Group. They were, it was small batches of the Christmas cards. But that group aimed to popularize contemporary American art through greeting cards. And as Christmas approaches, I thought I would mention the cards that he made. We have several of them. You know, he sent one to us every year, to the Albarella family, or he would send it to John and Kate Albarella and all the little Albarellas. So I thought I would end on this Christmas card. And I'll take questions if there are questions that I might be able to answer. Yes.
It's not actually a question, but I want to endorse his journals. They are fabulous. Like,
Yeah.
and it's not just his artwork and his career, it's daily events. I'll always be like, there are a couple sets of journals I do use in my research.
Yeah.
For time periods. And a perfect example was there was a Canadian wildfire in the 50s. I can't remember what
I think
year
it was in the 50s.
And a cloud came over Western New York, and all the news reports were it got dark.
Yeah.
But when you read his journal, it was, oh, the bright blue, he described the sky. It
Yeah.
didn't just get dark, and so in just the daily things of the church and those sorts of things, it's beyond the art.
Oh, yeah,
And he was so descriptive in his day-to-day life that if you have something you're looking up for the time period that he had his
Yeah.
journals,
Absolutely.
It's a good
Yep.
resource.
Yeah, and he wrote about everything, the weather, and it wasn't just, oh, today was a cold day. It was, a biting cold where, your hands would freeze to the railing of the porch steps, and it would go on. And he did. And in his journals, it wasn't just, he also in his journals would put the colors. I'm looking at the daisies, and they are a bright white with yellow shadings, and the sunlight has cast an orange aura around the leaves of the. So it was also specifics that he could then use in his sketches later, but they're beautifully written. They're not just if for some people who journal, it's just like it was a cold day, and I was really cold.
Are they online?
The journals are housed at the Burchfield Penny Art Center, where you can do research, but also you can research many of them online. And the Burchfield Penny also will post images on their social media sites, and along with the image, they usually try to pull out a journal entry that went along with that painting. So it'll give you some backstory on what the painting was about. Mebom Arts, right here in East Aurora, has a wonderful exhibit right now with Burchfield in it, and everyone should try and get over there. For sure. Wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Any other questions or comments?
These paintings, the whites are preserved. Are they preserved on watercolor paper, or does he use white?
They're pretty preserved on the watercolor paper, I would say. But, sometimes I will say that often his paintings are not as bright and brilliant looking in a reproduction like this slide as they are in real life. I tend to think his tones are, although they're saturated, a lot of them are saturated, they're not as bright, they're more muted. Especially in his later work when things were, although, now that I'm saying about it, some of them are bright. The watercolor paper, though, if you go to the gallery, it's, yes, he did, yeah. And they've kept them really, in perfect shape.
I feel like the daisies are just so brilliant. And
Yeah.
It's like, did he really have that vision that he preserved
Oh.
those daisies and
Yeah.
painted all around them, and they just popped?
Yeah, I think he did, and I think that was part of his talent and his vision. Because when you look at some of his other pieces too, you will see, brilliant colors coming out of like this dark wooded forest. Yeah. Yes.
Jackie, is that house still there?
Yes, the house is still there. My brother owned the house up until, I think he just sold it like 2 years ago.
Wow.
There are 2 young people that bought it, and they are trying to do some things with the studio. I believe it's an Airbnb now. So like if you're an artist, you could go. It's an apartment now? Okay, so the Airbnb is gone. Now it's a. They put the skylight. But the funny thing about that skylight, I'll say it was a riot. That skylight had a northern exposure, of course, and at one point he closed all the windows in the studio. The windows that were there, he boarded them all up. So the only light that came in at that point was the skylight, and that's what he would paint by. The studio had no water, so he would have to carry water back there for his brush. Bertha really carried the water back there. And it did have heat. There was a big furnace like up in this little crawl space up above with forced air heat. But other than that, it was just a big empty room. And that damn skylight always leaked from the day they put it in. So that studio often smelled kind of musty, and you wondered about his papers. But I mean, it didn't affect him, obviously. But I still remember how musty that studio was for you. And the roofer would always come over and put tar on the skylight, but it still would leak every time it poured. That's the other thing too, is people in Gardenville and some people in East Aurora as well. He had no money at the beginning. He wasn't famous for quite a long time, and he had a family to raise. So like, I know the furnace guy got paid in paintings, as did the plumber from Gardenville. So there were a lot of paintings, particularly from craftsmen in Gardenville, who it was the barter system, and you would trade. So yes. He went to the Chicago Art School. He had studied art very carefully. Yeah, and then he worked with other famous artists of the period who were all kind of evolving and finding their own kind of way in the art world.
Talk about that.
In America, yeah, he was always in America. Yes, Jerry.
So looking back, photographer yourself, look back, do you see that exposure to his work, environment,
Yeah, I thought about that a lot. And the thing was, as I started to really do photography seriously, and I thought about what influence he may have had on me. And I do think I know I was influenced by him, because when I started to really look at his work, and I was able to look at his work with an artistic eye and look at his process and read his journals, I found that, I was doing many of the same things. I mean, I'm really into nature too. I journal. I don't journal as well as he did. But also then I go, I also grew up in all the places where he painted. So in the creek where he stood and painted that painting, that was where I played, and so I've gone back to those places and revisited them and done my own artwork in those places. But yeah, I think for sure it influenced me, because I don't think you can, yeah, right. I don't think you can be around someone who is so proficient and so talented and hopefully you're able to at least soak in some of that, So yeah, I think it did influence me. Thank you all for coming. I wish you all happy holidays.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jackie. That was wonderful. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm just going to leave with a couple closing remarks, and then we'll get back to whatever we want to do for the rest of the evening. I wanted to take a few moments to thank all of our members who came out tonight to join us. I know that this is kind of a busy week. It's a very busy week in Rolla land, so to speak, and in East Aurora in general, because we have the Winter Festival and we have the Winter Wonderland, and everything is happening this week. But coming out tonight, and especially the board members that were here, that moving about, that are here to help. As Jackie mentioned, Grace has a wonderful exhibition of Burchfield's work that's going on at the moment. We didn't plan to hold this in conjunction with that. This was actually originally scheduled for October, and it was delayed, so it's a happy accident. And I have seen it, and I hope that you all take some time to check out that show, because it really is worth seeing. And really quickly, I realize it's not Giving Tuesday anymore, but please consider, if you enjoyed this evening's programming, becoming a member of Rolla. So Rolla is a 501c3. We have an educational initiative, and this is part of our outreach work that we do. So we are 100% membership revenue driven. And our chairman of membership, Rob Mayer, is here tonight, and he can assist anyone who wants to become a member of Rolla this evening. We are incentivizing. We have a lovely little hand-pressed Roycroft Chapel by Andre Chavez, who's one of our newer Roycroft artisans from Oregon. We support the needs of nearly 100 modern Roycroft Renaissance artists and masters across the country through the work that we do right here in East Aurora, which is a huge load to bear and also terribly exciting. Our next little journey will be on February 4th. It'll be the opening lecture of 2026, and we'll be joined by Dr. Gerald Mead to treat us to a speech entitled Roycroft Artists and Their Contemporaries. So we'll be looking at artworks from the Gerald Mead collection and, many past and present Roycroft painters, not just our original canon of Roycroft, but the modern masters that followed. And I know that an evening with Jerry's collection is always an exciting walk through art. So hopefully you will join us when that time comes around. We'll post a ticketing link on our socials and on our website. And if you are members of our email list on our website, you will get a notice of that so you can make sure that you mark it off. But little journeys are always the first Wednesday of the even months. So if you just put that on your calendar as a recurring and check back and see what we've got on the coming down the pipe, you can't go wrong.